What real-life story had the biggest plot twist you've ever seen? Story 1. I graduated from law school and got engaged to the girl I had been with throughout university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding, I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly, and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over property. Canberra is a pretty small city, and the legal world is even smaller there. So everywhere I went, I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down. Her too, as it turned out. And I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 people. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved to the island to start my posting, only to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with the person I quite honestly loathe more than anyone else in the world. Story 2. One guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his girlfriend. Yeah, she's pretty big, but she's amazing. She's the one for me. I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so on, I gave him encouraging words about how his life was going to change, and we bonded a bit. His baby was due right before Christmas. He missed our work Christmas party because the baby was supposedly being born. We expected him to be gone for paternity leave, but he showed up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant just to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up her size for no reason must have meant she was so heavy that you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds. They talked about baby names, how they'd take care of the child, all of that. I don't know what she thought would happen when 9 months passed and there was no baby. I guess it's good she came clean, though. A more deceptive person might have faked a miscarriage or something, but that was seriously messed up. Shortly after that, the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. Story 3. In 1991, I was 19, had just signed the lease for my first solo apartment, and received my first paycheck from my new job. I deposited the paycheck at an ATM, another first. I'd always gone into the bank before. 2 weeks later, I got my bank statement in the mail and saw, with horror, that I had only $1.87 in my account. That was way off. I should have had at least $200. I'd been very careful with my spending. I was freaked. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I was literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rang. It was the police asking if my ATM card had been stolen. I checked my wallet and saw the card was missing. My job at a theater pub gave me cash tips, so I didn't use it often. And I told them I was just about to call because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card and your $200, so come down to the police station, they said. I couldn't figure out how they had both my card and the cash. It didn't make sense. I drove down there. The detective said someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use the ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously, moving side to side like he was trying to avoid the camera. Bob said the man then left the ATM, got into a car and sped off. Bob used the ATM and his card popped out. He withdrew $200, then another card popped out. My card. Turns out the guy had left my card in the machine before driving off. Bob realized he'd withdrawn the money from someone else's account and brought the cash and card to the police. The detective gave me a description of the suspect. According to Bob, it was a man 5 feet 7 inches, brown hair, round gold-rimmed glasses. I said aloud, so, about my height, my color hair, and glasses like mine, before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in an ATM before, so I had been moving side to side following the screen instructions, filling out the envelope with my account number, entering the amount, etc. I then forgot to take my card and just left because I was a total idiot. I drove off fast because I was 19, and that's how I drove. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him and left, with the money I'd stolen from myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet, I still have the police report where I'm both the victim and the suspect. Story 4. I once had a job interview. It was very early in my career, and I was trying to move 500 miles to a new place. I built prototypes and brought samples of my work. It was a 9-hour drive, but everyone seemed so enthusiastic that I figured it was a sure thing. I didn't get the job. I found another job in the area and took it. 6 months later, they called and asked me to interview for the position above the one I had applied for. I was given an offer on the spot and worked there for almost a decade. In the first few months, the people there told me that the guy whose job I had, who would have been my boss if he'd hired me, had said the samples and work I showed were beyond him, and he didn't want an employee who knew more than he did. Well, I guess he doesn't have that problem anymore, since they fired him and replaced him with me. Story 5. One of my good friends in high school started hanging out with this guy from the other public high school in our city, and before long they were basically joined at the hip. She had a huge crush on him and was pretty sure he liked her too, but she'd never had a boyfriend before and was too shy to make the first move. One night they were hanging out, and he told her he had something huge to confess. He was gay. They remained close friends. Then a few months later at a party, the guy introduced all of us to his younger, by 1 year, brother. The dude and his brother looked similar, had similar personalities, and the exact same sense of humor. Fast forward 20 years, and my friend is happily married to the brother. Her best friend is her brother-in-law, and he and his husband are godfathers to her kids. Sometimes the painful crush on the gay dude pays off. Story 6. I work at a prison, and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother, who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English, but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We call a supervisor, and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and comes back in with her husband, who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario, and he asks, "Well, where did he go? He doesn't have any friends or family in the U.S. We told him we don't know where he went. He was released, so he could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says, "Well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs." So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is scooting around the U.S., and no one knows where he is. Story 7. For a semester in high school, my English teacher set up this game where one student was a secret killer. Every couple of days, the killer would sneak a note into a classmate's locker, backpack, textbook, or whatever that said, "You've been killed." My best friend and I were trying harder than anyone else in the class to play detective on this, especially near the end of the semester. Near the end of school, there were about 6 students left alive, and it turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. Edit. They took the last 6 students who were alive and brought them in front of the class one at a time so we could all debate if he or she was the killer or not, and the person could plead their case. The teacher brings my friend up and says, "Okay, tell us what happened." And my friend starts explaining how he had to be sneaky, and so on. So there was a good 20 seconds where I just didn't understand what he was talking about. There wasn't any great reveal or drum roll. He just brought him in front of the class and started explaining how he killed everyone. I lost it pretty good. The other twist that I forgot to mention is that around week 2 or 3, he went to a student he didn't really talk to much and told him that he was the killer and that he needed him to kill John Deere 89. So he handed him a few of the notes, and from then on, he had a guy on the inside helping him kill people. That's why he could kill so many people without being caught. Because if someone got killed, I was with my friend, so I could vouch for him. The teacher said there was nothing in the rule book that said you couldn't get another person to help you kill people. It was a huge gamble, because the other kid could have just said, "I caught the killer," and the game would be over. I forgot to mention that if you guessed who the killer was, nothing happened. You had to catch them in the act. So when there were only a few people left, everyone was yelling, "You're the killer!" and pointing fingers back and forth. Story 8. When I was a teen some 25 years ago, I played trumpet in the school band. We did a Halloween parade, but I had nothing to wear as a costume. I decided on a large black sheet with a hole in the top for my huge ponytail to stick out in all its glory of crazy frizzy poof of curls, and a hole for my face and arms to stick out. I got a lot of "Da fook are you supposed to be?" I don't know. A was it, I suppose. Anyway, after the parade, my mother wanted to see my locker before leaving just to surprise check for anything not allowed. We passed by the auditorium and noticed a talent show just beginning. Mom pressured me to enter playing my trumpet, in this weird was it costume, no less. By the time I was to go on, I still had no clue what to play. I felt silly in my Halloween costume getup when nobody else was in costume unless they were dancing or doing a magician act. I walked down the aisle toward the stage with trumpet in hand, contemplating what to do in my nervousness. Heard whispers among the crowd. As I climbed the little 3 steps up to the stage, I tripped and fell up the remaining 2 stairs. I'm so clumsy. So I stood up and played it off like I meant to do that. Began acting silly and tooting my horn like a duck. Did a silly dance to an improv version of the most basic song to play, Hot Cross Buns, Three Blind Mice. Ripples of kids were giggling in the audience. I saw my mother's face contorted in displeasure that I wasn't being serious enough to win this. Too bad, Mom. This was my time to shine in all my goofy, glorious weirdness. I wiggled my top-knot poof and played a few jazzy bits of songs some older folks would know. Then to finish off, I acted like I was swimming and began playing Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid, which I had learned the year before. Ended it by pretending to drown as I left the stage, without falling this time. Mom took me out into the hall to have her fit for about 10 minutes while the last contestants finished the show. She then went off to look through my locker while I put away my trumpet and prepared to leave. I waited for her by the auditorium exit. They began announcing the winners. I won first place. Story 9. During the last year of my grandfather's life, he had dementia and was having trouble keeping track of reality. Before he was placed into hospice, he kept complaining about a man that was in his house. He would say that the man came around at night and was taking his things and using his stuff. Grandma, of course, kept reassuring him that she was the only one there. His doctor increased his medications because he was losing touch with reality so badly. Fast forward to my grandfather's funeral, and a man showed up who wasn't known by more than a few people in the family. Turns out he was an old friend of my grandmother's who showed up to give his support. In a small town like that, it wasn't exactly unusual to have random people show up at the funeral home who had known the person at some point. Well, about a year later, my grandmother let it slip that she was seeing someone, the guy from the funeral. At this point, nothing too odd. They got to talking at church, and we thought it was sweet. Then a bit later, sweet, innocent old grandma mentioned that it was their 3rd anniversary. Grandpa died 2 years prior. This man was the person that Grandpa saw in his house every night. He was the reason everyone thought Grandpa was going crazy. He was the reason my grandfather was medicated to the point of being a vegetable for the last horrible year of his life. Story 10. There was a cookie exchange at my work. An odd pairing cookie was a rosemary caramel. It was so delicious I had 5 on my break. During the day I was so inspired. I worked in a bakery. I was just having the best day. All my favorite songs came on, and then I started getting these burps. It tasted like the rosemary, but something was off. I started feeling weird and tingly before my lunch break. My hands started to feel odd. Now, being the mixer for the day, I worked with heavy machinery and knives. Soon, a manager came by and asked if anyone had eaten some cookies. A short while later, I found myself in a room with a handful of other people. All had odd issues. Some were confused, others had upset stomachs. EMTs, poison control, local police, and firefighters were all cramming into the room to examine us. Turns out that odd pairing was weed cookies. We were stoned out of our minds. Story 11. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay, then suddenly their numbers would drop and they'd quit. In one of those cases, the guy quitting made a big scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other coworkers. At the HR meeting, the supervisor was going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing he had done wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all of this dude's mistakes. The entire time the guy sat silent, said nothing, just stared at whomever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder and just played recording after recording. Of what, you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening him, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete nightmare. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their work environment miserable to protect his position. I'm told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. Story 12. I was on a flight from Paris to Boston. I had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point, a man from a few rows up went into a bathroom, and after a couple of minutes, came out and just stood in the aisle, which got my attention. He kept going in and coming back out, looking up toward where he was sitting. I saw a woman sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he didn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of going in and out, he got the woman to come back there. The lights were out and most of the plane was sleeping, and once she came back to him, they started making out in the bathroom hallway before he went into one and pulled her in with him. They were in there for quite a while, and then he came out and went back to his seat. A few minutes later, she came out and did the same. They were really flirty in their seats, and about an hour later repeated it. The man went in, and then she joined him. They did this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who was sitting next to me, caught on to what they were doing as well, and we joked about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We got off the plane, and the woman was standing at the gate waiting, but the man was nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane got off, a completely different man went up to her, gave her a kiss on the lips, and asked if she was able to get any sleep on the flight, calling her dear. Then they walked off toward the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Story 13. When I started school, I figured out that being raised by your grandparents wasn't normal. And then when I was a little older, I found out the reason why was because my biological parents gave me to them. I was told that my biological mother was sick and assumed that I was maybe a few months old at the youngest. No one talked much about my biological father or his family, and I only met his father and stepmom once when I was a toddler. I rarely saw my biological parents while they were together, and only started seeing my biological mother regularly when they divorced, and she moved back to the family home, and we became roommates. Years later, I found out that my biological father remarried and started a new ginger family right away. And then around 10 or so, I was helping my mom, aka grandmother, with something, and it involved going through her lockbox of important papers. I found a paper pertaining to the custody case, and it was dated 2 months after I was born. I asked questions, and it turned out that my biological parents gave up after a week, and my biological father wanted to throw me in a dumpster. Lucky for me, my biological mother called her mom, and I was not thrown in the trash. My dad had been at work while all this went down, so that day he came home and found out there was an extra person there for the indefinite future. After my biological father changed his plan to putting me in foster care, my grandparents filed for custody because the thought of not knowing where I was literally nightmare-inducing. Bio Dad popped up a couple times when I was older, and the last time we were in contact, which was through email, he tried to claim that I had been kidnapped, which is ridiculous for so many reasons. We don't talk anymore because he's the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego, and I already have a dad who is like if Shepard Book and Ron Swanson fused into one being. Story 14. I was working a new position in a new store for a company I had worked many years for. I try to develop very good relations with all my coworkers to help the day go by. I joke, I tease, and we sometimes would hang out after work. One of my coworkers, we'll call him James, would frequently tease me back. One day he wagged his finger and said, girlfriend, in what I believed to be a teasing manner. Grabbing the moment to tease back, I stated, "Oh, come on, James. Only girls can get away with the head bob, statements, and we all know you'd make an ugly girl." James's scraggly bearded face instantly burst into laughter as everyone around him looked terrified. He laughed and told me I didn't understand it. But I happened to say something really funny. Everyone else looked like the color had drained from their faces. Turns out, James had been born a girl, and I had met him 3 years after his full transition. He was good-natured about it. I told him to compliment his doctors, who helped him because he was obviously living his true life that made him happy. Underneath it all, I was mortified and have never made a gender joke since. You never know. Story 15. Years ago, when I was in college, I drove back to my hometown to spend Valentine's Day with my best friend, as we were both single and lonely. She got a group of people together and made plans for all of us to go ice skating together on Valentine's Day. A lot of people we knew from high school were going to be there, including this one skanky girl my bestie did not like. When I asked her why she had invited this girl, she started gushing about how much this girl had grown and matured, and how impressed she was by her. Well, great, I thought. I love me a good success story, and I was really excited to see her. Well, ice skating never happened. That girl had gotten into an argument with her mother and her ex, during which she had threatened to harm herself. Her mom and ex made the mutual decision to call 911 and have her admitted to the hospital. So my best friend and I went to visit her in the hospital. Now, apparently, when you are a female and you're admitted to the hospital for mental health concerns, they do a bunch of tests on you, including a pregnancy test, and they for sure pregnancy tested her. She dropped the bomb on us that she was 8 weeks pregnant. We congratulated her, of course, even though a baby was the absolute last thing she needed. And bless her heart, she seemed to be self-aware enough to realize this, and she kept telling us, "No, this is not a good thing." But wait, there's more. Y'all thought the pregnancy was the plot twist, right? Well, little did we know there was much more to come. See, after leaving the hospital, my best friend and I decided to hit up the grocery store for some chocolates and sparkling grape juice to enjoy together. While at the grocery store, we ran into a guy that my best friend knew from elementary school. They made small talk for a few minutes. Now apparently he knew Skanky Girl too, and I can't remember why, but he brought her up. And here's where it gets good. He mentioned that the last time he had seen her was a couple of months ago while hanging out with a mutual friend. My best friend told him that Skanky Girl was in the hospital because she had threatened to harm herself and that we had just visited her in there. And get this, she's 8 weeks pregnant. Upon hearing this news, the poor guy's face went as white as a sheet. He told us that the last time he saw her, which was about 8 weeks ago, he had hooked up with her, without protection. A few weeks later, she had called him to tell him that she was pregnant and the baby was his. She didn't have enough money to pay for an abortion, so he had borrowed $500 from various friends and family members so she could have one. So what he and we wanted to know was this. If she was still pregnant, then where did the money go? It's been almost a decade, and we still don't know the answer. Story 16. Finding out my girlfriend was cheating on me. She and I were going to go to the same college, but she started a semester before I did. I went up to visit her one weekend and had a great time on campus and met a lot of cool people. Then I got a Facebook message from a guy I met there that said, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I think you're a really great guy, so I think you deserve to know the truth. She's been cheating on you." I decided to call her and ask her about it, and she admitted it. It was very painful because it was the first long-term relationship I had, and it was especially hard knowing I would have to see her on campus in a few months when I started. Funny thing is that pretty much all her friends that I hung out with when I was there visiting sided with me and ended up becoming some of my closest friends throughout my college years. Story 17. I went to college in Milwaukee, but I took some initial credits at a 2-year campus in Waukesha, a suburb just outside the city, to save money. The University of Wisconsin has a series of 2-year campuses across the state. They did some classes remotely, including German. The professor was on my campus, however, so he did one in-person session and then another section for the remote students at the other campuses all over the state. Anyway, we took a field trip one day to a really good old world, authentic German restaurant to try some different foods. It was great. He invited all the remote students to come down, but didn't expect anyone to make the trip. The day we went, the prof told us one person was coming down from Wausau, almost 3 hours to the north, and also my hometown. Some of my classmates knew I was from up there and had this perception of it being a small up-north town. It kinda is, but the whole metro area is probably around 100,000. Small, but not true small-town living. I explained to them that Wausau isn't that small, and I don't know everyone there. It's not like that. Sure enough, this guy shows up. We look at each other for a moment, and he asks, "Hey, aren't you married to insert my wife's name here?" God damn it. Note, yes, I was married in college. I was still in my 20s. I was a non-trad. We got married when my wife finished college, and then she supported us while I went back to finish my degree. She's a saint. Story 18. Several years ago, I went down to the New River Gorge with my wife, then fiancé, and a group of friends to camp and rock climb over Memorial Day weekend. Over the course of the trip, 5 of us decided that on the last day, instead of doing another climbing location, we were going to go whitewater rafting. We booked with a guide company and showed up in the morning ready to go. We hopped on the bus to the launch site, and when we got there, we were told that we were going to have an addition to our group of 5. The guy who was introduced to us said he got too drunk the night before and missed the first trip of the day that he and his friends had booked. But he lucked out since there was one open spot in the next trip. Great. We load up and start the trip, just chatting with our new rafting friend. Over the course of the ride down, this guy seemed to know his way around a raft and seemed weirdly familiar with the river. At one point, our guide was pointing out a class 2 or 3 rapids section that he said was safe to swim through. This guy immediately jumped out of the raft, climbed up a rock in the middle of the river, and did a perfect 360 flip into the rapids. Near the end of the trip, our guide hits us with the plot twist. We're his first ever group. This was his test, and our suspiciously knowledgeable addition was his supervisor. We were all blown away. We spent the rest of the trip just piecing together the missed clues in the best bamboozle of our lives. Needless to say, the trainee guide passed his test and got a great first review and a nice tip, and we all got a great story. Story 19. I have a coworker, Joe, great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that a child-free life was okay with them. So she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much. But as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to a point where they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves. Something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now, Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought the car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu she just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous, just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare of being pregnant. Multiple doctors said it's just not going to happen for me. No way." But her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was actually wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick and, yep, you guessed it, pregnant. So, in their 40s and with 12 years of living, just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited, even though they had to sell the sports car, since a 2-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way. Happy, healthy baby. So they became a family of 3, and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school. Great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's going to throw at you. Story 20. I'm from a relatively rural area in the South and went to high school with your average stereotypical white rural rednecks. Went back for a reunion and saw one of the redneckiest of backwoods hicks there with his wife. When I say redneckiest, I mean in high school he was a skull-chewing, pickup driving, rebel flag waving Appalachian mountain redneck. His wife was very tall and looked familiar, but I couldn't place her from anywhere. So I just chalked it up to her having one of those faces and didn't think any more about it. Until later that night when Redneck Prime was full on beating another reunion attendee in the parking lot screaming, "She's a she, motherfear. Trans women are women, and I love my wife. And if you call her by her high school dead name one more time, she can visit my ass in prison, 'cause I'll beat you to death for." Turns out the one kid in high school who was openly gay in the rural South in the mid-90s was actually a trans woman who hadn't come to that conclusion yet, transitioned, and fell in mutual love with a dude I would have 100% assumed was a raging transphobe. Story 21. In high school, I often stayed late to work on AV projects. In December 1998, I was shooting a segment for the school TV channel's annual holiday special. Specifically, my friend was interviewing students, faculty, and staff, those who happened to be around and willing to appear on camera, about their holiday memories. A particular take was spoiled when a group of students walked past and one of them shouted, "Hey, interview subject's nickname. Your kakadishpit's hanging out." Enraged beyond reason, I spun the camera on its tripod, pointed it at the group of students, laughing as they headed out the nearest door, and informed the offender that I had him on tape. This later became the furthest thing from my mind when I learned that my mother had been critically injured in a head-on collision. The other car, which had veered into her lane, contained 3 girls from my school, the driver and 2 passengers. Tragically, one of the passengers died instantly. I didn't know any of these girls personally, but I learned the following day that the one who was killed was the 15-year-old sister of the friend who was interviewing people for my holiday segment. That's not the twist. A couple of weeks later, when I finally began reviewing and editing the footage, a classmate in the room with me made a startling discovery. Among the laughing students was my friend's sister. She was on her way to the car in which she was killed about 20 minutes later. I'd unwittingly recorded the last image of her alive and the last time she ever saw her brother. Story 22. I dated a girl who lived in a city I had recently moved away from. On my birthday, I drove out so that we could be together, we'd go out to dinner. The entire time we were at dinner, she was distant and constantly checking her phone, sending texts, etc. There was virtually no conversation, and her constant texting was uncharacteristic and started to give me the vibe that she was either cheating on me or just not that into the relationship anymore. When we finished eating, she asked if it was okay if we stopped by a mutual friend's house to pick up some weed. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a pretty selfish request considering it was my birthday and I don't smoke weed. As we're walking up the steps to our friend's apartment, I'm running through different ways for me to break off the relationship until the door opens and I realize she had planned a big surprise party with a ton of my old friends, many of whom she didn't even know. All of the texts and lack of attention that I had been attributing to a lack of interest in me turned out to be the exact opposite. She's a beautiful person. Story 23. I was putting myself through college as a single mom. Met another lady my age going for the same degree. We became friends, or so I thought. One day she just starts hating on me and gets a bunch of toadies to hate on me too. She accuses me of cheating and tries to get me kicked out of college. She tries to get me fired from substitute teaching by saying I was cheating. She tries to tell people I mess around with other people's husbands. Now we're both like 30 years old. This is some high school behavior she's pulling. I'm trying to move on and meet this other lady going for the same degree. She tells me the same thing happened to her with the same woman. We graduate with our associates, and then the 2 of us go on to get our bachelors. She calls me up one day to say she ran into this woman at a restaurant where she, the friend, waitresses. The woman is there with her toadies, and they all start yucking it up about what a loser I am. My friend tells them that I'm graduating summa cum laude with my bachelor's and working at General Motors. The woman starts screaming so loudly that the manager asks her to leave. Turns out she flunked out of getting her associates and then got fired from her nail salon for being a nasty person. She hadn't worked since, and her husband was about to leave her because of all the money she dumped into her education. Still pretty satisfied about the karma there. Story 24. When I finished university, I started a job about an hour away from my parents' house. The hours were terrible, and the job ended up being the total opposite of what I interviewed for. I roughed it out for almost a year, slowly getting more depressed by the whole situation, until one night I laid in bed till 4 a.m. and had the revelation that I was going to quit. The next morning I go in, and my regional manager tells me that she has a job offer for me for the following year. She wants me to move 3 hours away for exactly the same pay I was making now. No moving bonus, no benefits, nothing. I call my parents on my break and have a meltdown, and they're so worried they drive up after my shift to make sure I'm okay. They end up taking me to dinner at a local casino, and they tell me to swipe my points card to see if I have a coupon for food. I end up losing $100 and we leave for the night. I don't show up for work the next day and hop on a plane to visit my girlfriend who's away at school. As I'm walking off the plane, I turn off airplane mode and have a voicemail. The casino has called my phone and left a message that says, "Hey, give us a call back. Congrats." When I call them, I get asked if I'm sitting down because I won a draw for $10,000. Didn't even know I entered the draw, but it did it automatically when I swiped my points card. Flew back Sunday night and went and picked up the money. Got to walk into work on the Monday and slide a picture of myself holding a giant check across my boss's desk. Left shortly after for a better job with a better company. Story 25. I was seeing this beautiful Italian woman in college, Francesca. I couldn't believe she liked me, honestly. She had everything: looks, wealthy family, extremely smart, talented, and I felt I didn't deserve her. But she insisted I was great, and we fell in love. It wasn't long before I was over at family events, mingling with her family, gigantic, loving Italian family, and I quickly became friends with her cousin, Marco. Marco was a businessman with a keen eye for talent, or so he put it, and he offered me a job running one of his furniture stores as he was involved in other investments. As it turns out, I was a damn good furniture salesman. Marco and I were best friends, and I was set to marry Francesca. Life was amazing, and that's when things changed. I started coming home to an empty house. Francesca would be gone for days on end, and then sporadically show up, give me a kiss on the cheek, and disappear again. Marco never seemed to want to hang out anymore, and I was getting extremely suspicious that something weird was going on. One day I was walking through town and decided to stop into a new bakery on a whim, and I saw Francesca there, behind the cash register. I was taken aback because, as long as I'd known her, she never mentioned anything about working at a bakery. I approached the register and her face turned pale with a look of utter embarrassment. Can we talk later?" she said in a hushed but stern tone. I told her sure, but I still wanted a croissant. So she grabbed me a fresh croissant and shooed me out of the door. That night I waited patiently for Fran to call me, and finally my phone rang. She told me to meet her and Marco outside, so I got up and ran outside to see them both standing in a defensive position, almost ashamed to see me. I demanded to know what was going on, and it was then that Marco explained to me that the reason their family was so wealthy was from peddling illegal substances and laundering money through various businesses, aka the furniture store, the bakery, a laundromat, you name it, all owned by members of the family and all fronts for illicit money. I had stumbled upon Francesca at one of the family's businesses. Well, apparently the jig was up, and they knew they'd be going to jail soon, so they wanted to distance themselves from me so I didn't get wrapped up in it. Marco touched my shoulder and told me he needed one last thing, that croissant I took from the bakery. "You never paid for it," he said. I was baffled that he would care about something so small at a time like this, but I asked him what I owed. It was at that point I noticed Marco wasn't an Italian man at all, but a great big creature from the Paleolithic era with giant eyes and a long neck. "That's gonna be about $350. Story 26. I met a guy on a cruise ship when I was 13. Long story short, we spent a few days talking and hanging out, and I basically fell head over heels. On the last night, we never got a chance to say goodbye or exchange numbers, and I only knew his first name. It should have been nothing more than a forgotten childhood fling, but for some reason I could never quite forget about him. I guess you could say he was my first love, in a naive sort of way. I went on to have a few long-term relationships, but I always found myself missing this guy I'd met so many years ago, and I left those future relationships feeling a kind of emptiness I can't explain. By a weird string of unlikely events that would take paragraphs to explain, I reconnected with this mystery cruise guy from my childhood 7 years later, at 20 years old. It took a few weeks for him to confirm with his family whether his cruise had been the exact same week as mine, but we confirmed they were the same length of time. Both traveled to the same places and happened around approximately the same time frame. Most significantly, though, the guy I reconnected with randomly told me a very specific story about something that happened at a band concert in 6th grade. And as he told it, I realized it was the exact same story the guy on the cruise had told me. He even told it the same way. We were still waiting for confirmation, but honestly, at this point I was convinced this was the guy I met years ago. All the details kept lining up perfectly, and things just felt right somehow. We got really close over those next few weeks, talking for hours and hours on end and just really hitting it off. Then he hears back from his sister, and he finds out his cruise was a completely different year than mine, and there's no logical way we could have met before. We're still dating a year and a half later, though. Guess he was the one I was searching for after all. Story 27. There's this guy I used to work with years ago. Let's call him Aaron. Aaron would always whine and complain about everything. It was really annoying. Granted, the company I work for was terrible, but seriously, it's not the worst. And if you don't like it, just pack up and leave. Well, after a year, that's exactly what he did. He phoned in sick for a couple of days and then called again and said he was quitting. Never even handed in his 2-week notice. Apparently, he got a job at another, smaller but similar company that was just starting out and was offered a slightly better salary, and so I heard an easier workload. Fast forward 2 years, and our entire company was called in for a meeting by the administrator. He announced that we had acquired this smaller company and would be taking it over in the next couple of months. It turns out it was the same company that Aaron left us for. The previous owner had bit off more than he could chew and decided to bail out. Aaron was offered the same compensation as the others who worked the same job as him, but I guess he was too proud for that and just quit again. Story 28. This will probably be super cliche, but my grandma had some rough days in a hospital bed. We were fearing the worst, and all the family were taking turns to keep her company. This was way before cell phones existed, so communication wasn't as easy as today. So my dad got a call one of those days, and it was my aunt who was with her. Of course, I don't know exactly what she said, but my dad understood that she was dead. We rushed over there basically as soon as he hung up because he wanted us to say goodbye. During the whole car trip, my dad was bawling his heart out. We arrived at the hospital. We were, of course, super sad. We already knew which room she was in, so we went directly there, ready to say goodbye, except she wasn't dead at all. She was sitting in her bed eating soup with a nurse like any other day. I was like 7 years old at the time, and I really freaked out, but was extremely happy about the whole situation. We talked with her for some minutes, and my dad couldn't stop crying and hugging her. My aunt wasn't in the room, but she arrived a little later, and my mom was incredibly mad at her for the false alarm. My aunt insisted several times that she never said our grandma was dead. However, in the next half hour or so, the rest of our family arrived at the hospital too, because everybody received a similar call from my aunt, and everybody had the same idea, that grandma was dead. I don't remember the exact details, but as far as I recall, the thing was that my grandma had some sort of minor stroke, and her heart stopped for a few seconds. But somehow my aunt blew the thing out of proportion on the phone calls. We ended up basically having a party in her room that day because all of us were together, which was a very rare scenario in my extended family. And I felt that the sadness we felt before arriving at the hospital made us appreciate the happiness more. And I think that somehow that impromptu family party helped my grandma recover, and she managed to live for a few more years after that. Story 29. My buddy started dating this girl. She was from the opposite side of the country, said her dad was some mega rich guy in Singapore or the Philippines. She said she had a large trust. They got pretty serious, and she rented this luxurious condo here, bought a brand new Escalade, a dog. He moved in with her. He's a breast guy, so she went and had surgery. She said she had to go back across the country every so often to see her sisters and family. This goes on for a year or two. My buddy always asked to go with her to meet her sisters and family. And finally she agrees over Thanksgiving, but says he has to get a hotel room because she doesn't want her family to know she's living with someone outside of marriage. Thanksgiving morning, he wakes up to a knock on the door. She's not in the room, so he answers it, and it's some random guy who turns out to be his girlfriend's husband. Her sisters she had pictures of and talked about were actually her children, and her husband was the super wealthy one, not her dad. They sat and talked for a good half hour, and then I got a phone call on Thanksgiving asking if I could pick him up at the airport later that evening. Oh, and she said she was our age at the time, 24ish, and turns out she was 38. Story 30. Had a longtime client bring her rabbit in because her estranged husband had been keeping it and neglecting it while she and her kids were in a women's shelter. After checking the rabbit out, doing a nail trim, cutting some mats out, and feeding it some recovery food, she explained how she got the rabbit back. Her oldest kid, probably 11 or 12, had been staying with her mother-in-law, but the mother-in-law hadn't been letting her son, my client's husband, see the kid because there was a restraining order against him for the entire family due to physical abuse. So my client's husband found out when his oldest kid was at his mother's house, went over there with a gun, shot and killed his own mother right in front of the kid, and tried to kidnap his son. The kid got away and ran to a neighbor's house to call the cops. My client had gotten the rabbit back when the cops came to her for permission to search her husband's house. This whole thing happened within like 8 hours of when she brought the rabbit in, right before we closed for the day. We didn't charge her for the visit. We let her stay in the clinic as long as she wanted. I think the doc even went next door to buy her a pizza. Story 31. When I worked at an amusement park, our employee parking lot had this lifted truck with flames on the side, huge smokestacks, and hanging truck nuts on the back. We affectionately named it Douchebag Truck. One night we're walking through the parking lot and we've all had a massive amount to drink. I make a comment that I need to puke, and someone jokingly said to puke in the back of douchebag truck. I did, without hesitation. We all laughed, and then another friend decided he had to pee in the back of douchebag truck. Again, we laughed. Flash forward a month, I'm at a party with my friends, and this angry guy starts a fight with this hippie dude. We break up the fight, and the hippie was grateful, so he bought us all beers, and we all became fast friends. The day hippie friend is moving out, we all offer to help him pack and move. We follow him, boxes in hand, as he leads us to douchebag truck. We stared in disbelief. Nothing could have prepared me for this. Story 32. A few years ago, I was in Cuba with some friends, and on the second night, we went to a club called The Cave. We were having a good time on the dance floor when all of a sudden, we see this woman bent over with a guy dancing behind her, and her face was stuffed into another guy's crotch. It was dark, and my friends and I slowed down our groove trying to make sense of what was happening, and honest to God, I'm pretty sure she was performing a S-act on the dance floor. Fast forward to the end of the week. We're on the plane heading back home. I was sitting next to this guy who was raving about how this was his first time out of the country, Canada, and that he had such a good time. We were trading stories back and forth, and he said 2 days before we left, he met this one girl with a solid figure and how she was amazing in bed. I was telling him how we went to the cave and was showing him pictures from my camera. We're scrolling through, and he stops on one and points to a girl in the background. That was the girl I hooked up with. I took a closer look at the pic, and sure enough, it was the same woman that was involved in that dance floor incident. Poor guy. I didn't have the heart to tell him what I witnessed. Didn't want to ruin his first vacation. Story 33. Happened to me earlier this year. For context that will be important later, I work in HR for a well-known corporation, and my parents have been divorced since 2010. I was at work when my sister texted me a screenshot of a Facebook message. It was a woman in her mid-20s who was asking my sister to help her get in touch with me, though she didn't say why. I told my sister it was probably just someone weird who wanted a job at my company and saw that I was in HR. There have been enough strange people friending me on LinkedIn over the years that it seemed like the most logical explanation. Didn't think more about it until I talked to my mom later that day and found out that she had received a similar message from the same woman. When I saw my wife that evening, she had a message as well. At this point, I was a little worried that we were dealing with an actual stalker. My wife brought up the possibility that, since I had taken the 23andMe genetic test a few years back and was sharing my results, maybe it was a distant relative who was just a little too enthusiastic about genealogy. I thought it was unlikely, but decided I would check the site later that night, which I did from my phone while I was using the bathroom about an hour after dinner. Good thing I was already there, because I would have needed to be when I saw the results. She was my half-sister. After a brief moment of shock, I called my dad and asked him why I had a half-sister showing up on my genetic matches. He said that he would be over later. We were staying at his place for a few weeks waiting to take occupancy of our new house. But he didn't sound overly concerned, which was weird given the circumstances. He showed up about an hour later with my mom. They proceeded to explain to me that they had trouble conceiving and that my biological father was actually an anonymous sperm donor. They were under the impression that his sample was only used to create me and my sister, but that was obviously not the case. I went from having one sibling to at least 9 that I know of. I've been in contact with some of them, and it's been pretty cool getting to know them. Also, it totally explained why I have terrible calves. Story 34. Bit late to the party, but I have a good one. My best friend was dating this girl that he met on Tinder for approximately 18 months. She had a kid from a previous abusive relationship and also claimed to have PTSD from it. She also said she had cancer and spent a fair bit of time in the hospital. However, she would never let my friend see her while she was in the hospital. One day he gets a message from her Facebook account, but it's from someone claiming to be her boyfriend. She had been dating both of them for 18 months. She faked having cancer, and whenever she was in the hospital, she was actually with the other guy. The PTSD was also fake. She told both of them she had it, but described different symptoms depending on who she was with. At one point, she faked a pregnancy and subsequent miscarriage with my friend, but never mentioned it to the other boyfriend. Turns out she has a long history of doing this kind of thing to con people out of money. The biological father of the child took her to court for custody and won full custody. He was never abusive, by the way. And now my friend and the other guy are looking at taking her to court for fraud. Story 35. During my senior year of high school, my friend's home life started to fall apart. His dad was a massive alcoholic who had lost most of their money day trading. His mom started to use the kids as weapons against their dad, leading to a Cold War type situation in the house. None of the kids wanted to take sides, but eventually each one was pulled into one scheme or another. They'd hide things, sneak things to secret storage units, go to events with one parent over the other, etc. The most ridiculous situation came when their mother asked my friend's little brother to steal the key to the mailbox and secretly get it copied at the hardware store. She claimed the father was stealing her mail in order to make her miss important correspondences and look like an unfit mother for court proceedings. This was obviously crazy talk, but the brother had the key made regardless. A few months later, the mom asked my friend's brother to copy the key again. Apparently, the lock had been changed. She claimed the father had bugged the house, was monitoring everyone's texts, and was basically employing their little sister as a spy to have a full grasp on everything happening in the house. That's how he knew the key was copied. More crazy talk. Well, all this kept happening for a long time. We left for college and eventually came back the next summer. Due to other family drama, it wound up that for about 2 weeks, my friend and his brother were living at home by themselves. Obviously, they turned the house into a den of underage drinking and weed smoking. Soon, someone had the idea to go looking for some of the bongs and weed paraphernalia that had been confiscated by the parents over the years. So we went into the father's room. We found the bongs, but we also found so much more. He had an entire dresser full of unopened mail. He had stacks of printed out text conversations from every member of the family. He had surveillance equipment. He also had a bunch of weed and a double-sided toy. But that part isn't important. Turns out the mom wasn't crazy. Story 36. In school, we once went to see a court case. Everyone told me that it wasn't going to be like in the movies. But let me tell you, it was pretty exciting. We already knew beforehand that the accused had pled guilty, and we therefore assumed that it was going to be a quick case. But so much was unraveled. So, the case was about a guy who had robbed another man in the middle of the night. During the trial, the judge asked the accused why he had robbed that person at the exact spot he did. It happened at 4 a.m. after all. And the accused was like, no reason. Turned out it happened in front of a brothel from where the accuser had just come out. And the robber was sort of nice enough to try to save that guy's dignity and tried not to mention it. Also, I imagine that this whole situation was so much more awkward for the accuser because a whole class of 17-year-old girls was there watching him. Then the accuser was super annoyed and talked about how the robber had tried to apologize to him and how he wasn't going to accept that apology. And the judge was all like, yeah, that doesn't really matter in a legal setting. Then they talked about the robber's immigrant background and how he had already been married, and that didn't work out. Although he was only about 21, and there was some more family drama. It truly felt like a crazy soap opera. Then in the break, the robber even began talking to one of us girls, and our teacher was super into it and hoped to get some intel into the case. I wouldn't say it was one big plot twist, but it truly was a roller coaster of events, and in general, a very weird afternoon. Story 37. Okay, so when I was 13, I was very attracted to one of my classmates. I just loved the way her body looked. I loved how girly she was, and I loved the clothes she wore. I eventually realized that I did not have sexual feelings for her. I was jealous. This is what started my journey of realizing the fact that I am transgender. Fast forward to around 5 years later, and I was trying to reach out and make new friends. I went into the LGBT club at my school and met this amazing transgender guy. He and I became good pals since we were the only two students with non-traditional gender identities. This is where the plot twist comes in. Last week we were hanging out and playing some Pokemon Go. Eventually we decided to talk about the past, and he showed me a picture of himself from freshman year. He was the girl who made me question my gender identity in the first place. I was completely mind-blown. Thank you for reading, and sorry about my grammar. English is not my first language, but I am trying to work on my English writing skills. Story 38. I was about 14. Don't remember my exact age, although I could reverse engineer it. I had never kissed a girl, never really had a girlfriend. I was a gawky and introverted nerd living in a little town. Didn't have many friends and wasn't all that crazy about most of the few I did have. I was the smartest kid in my class, but scrawny and unathletic. In the span of a few years, I had somehow gone from being one of the cool kids in my grade to being one of the people mostly ignored by the cool kids. I felt alone and isolated most of the time. My older brother gets married, and they have a major wedding reception at her parents' house in a town about 10 miles away from mine. 2 bars, no one cares if kids are drinking. This house is an old mansion in a small Midwestern town, has about 20 rooms. I've had some drinks and am feeling good when someone tells me that one of the bridesmaids has a little sister my age who thinks I'm cute. I eventually find her, it's a huge party, and we chat for a bit and hit it off. She's pretty and seems bright and funny and nice. I have visions of having a real girlfriend for the first time. I feel like this could be a turning point in my life. I've met a cool girl, and she actually seems to like me. Between the alcohol buzz and the unexpected situation, I feel like a little kid who has come downstairs on Christmas morning and found everything he wants under the tree, plus a bunch of other great stuff he didn't even know existed. We roam off, holding hands, and find an empty room. We sit on a little couch and talk some more. Finally, I work up my nerve, and I kiss a girl for the first time in my life, and she throws up in my mouth and runs out of the room. Story 39. So my girlfriend and I currently live in Taiwan and have been for nearly 2 years now. We will be leaving soon to go back to South Africa to pursue other interests. Anyway, we are both fans of tattoos, so we decided a while back to get each other's Chinese names, which are given to us when we arrived, tattooed on our backsides before we leave. So we go looking for the closest tattoo shop. As it's not a big job, we didn't feel the need to research as thoroughly as we did before our other ones. Luckily, there's a shop literally 2 minutes walk from our place. So we go in to check the place out and look at the guy's work. The tattoo artist doesn't speak any English, and our Mandarin isn't great either. So he calls his brother to come translate. We get it all booked and sorted, and our appointment is set for that coming Sunday. We arrive on Sunday and start getting it done. His brother is there, and we are all chatting away happily. His mom is also there, taking photos and being the typical embarrassing mom. It's a family business, and the whole family is tattooed up and seems super proud of their tattoo artist's son. Anyway, my girlfriend gets hers done, and while we're waiting for the stencil to dry on me, the artist invites me out for a smoke. We're outside smoking, and I notice a tattoo on his neck. The style looks very familiar, so I point to it and say the tattoo artist's name, which is Doctor. He nods and smiles and says, "Yes, yes, Doctor." I then pull up my sleeve to show him my first tattoo, which was also done by Doctor. Now this blew both our minds because Doctor is a South African artist, and as far as I knew hadn't traveled, although he must have, because I knew this guy hadn't been to SA. But to randomly stumble into a shop in Asia that's a couple minutes walk from me and find out this guy has been tattooed by the same person who lives halfway across the world blew my mind a little bit. Story 40. So my younger brother lived with my dad part of the time and my mom part of the time. My older brother and I lived with my mom full time. My brother always told me strange stories about hearing noises in my dad's house and my dad acting weird. For instance, there would be a loud thud from upstairs and my dad would clear his throat or turn up the TV. I told my brother I thought it was weird, but I figured he was being paranoid. My dad was a really big guy. He used to eat dinner and then save himself meals and bring them upstairs to his man cave, where he would sometimes sleep. He's selfish and needed some kind of escape. All that stuff went on for months, possibly years. My brother started to suspect that someone was living up there. He even said it sounded like the bed was rocking and heard moans when my dad was supposedly alone up there. I started to worry for my brother's safety, but his sanity too. What a strange thing to think. I guess my dad's wife and my little brother wouldn't go up there because it was my dad's area. My brothers and I all went over to my dad's for Father's Day. We were just hanging out, chatting, when all of a sudden, my dad's wife screamed from upstairs. Well, my dad did have someone living up there. I guess his wife went up there for the first time in a long time. He straight up lied to his wife and told her that the girl got kicked out and needed a place to stay. She also happened to be someone my dad dated before getting married to his current wife.